we're going to shift gear a little bit now, because this is another one that I'm excited to talk to you about and get your thoughts on.
Sure.
And this one is really, it's quite live in the UK right now.
Mm-hmm.
We are filming this on the 30th of July, and on the 20th of June, where are we?
June
2025, 30th of June, and on the 20th of June, the government passed a bill, and I'm going to read a little bit just to frame what's happening, so we're all kind of up to speed with what I'm going to ask you about. Okay, so the UK Parliament has recently taken significant steps towards legalising assisted dying, sometimes referred to as euthanasia, for the terminally ill adults in England and Wales. So a quick snapshot of that. On the 20th of June, a bill was passed in the House of Commons, only by a narrow margin, which I find fascinating, 314 votes to 291, and this applies only to England and Wales. And effectively it says that anyone 18 or older in the UK who has mental capacity, so clear voluntary wish to die that's free from coercion, can do so. They must be terminally ill with a prognosis of 6 months or less to live. So that's recently been passed. Pastor Mike, what are your thoughts on that? And really, a follow-up question is, how should we as the church respond to something like this happening in our nation?
Yeah. Well, first off, it might be helpful just to kind of clarify the terminology, because what's been passed in Parliament is what's called the Assisted Dying Bill. So assisted dying is giving medical practitioners the legal ability to hand somebody a poison or something that will end their lives. That person must administer it themselves, or it's by their decision. So that's assisted dying. I'm assisting you in dying by handing you the method that will bring that about, which is different to assisted suicide. So assisted suicide would be when anybody, not just medical practitioners, anybody assists somebody else in taking their own lives, either by handing them, again, a medication or poison or some kind of thing, or kind of taking them to a location in the world that might be able to give them that. That's also assisted suicide. And then there's euthanasia. Euthanasia is perhaps a broader term where any person can end their lives for any reason. And again, with the help of a medical practitioner. So that medical practitioner is able to help a person end their life, but they may not have a terminal illness. They may have a mental illness, or they may just not want to live anymore, etc., etc. So that would be, again, there's voluntary euthanasia, where a person decides they want to. And there's what they call involuntary euthanasia, where perhaps a person isn't able to make a decision and somebody else makes that decision on their behalf. So you have assisted dying, assisted suicide, voluntary euthanasia, and involuntary euthanasia. And so it's worth just clarifying that, to say that what has been passed, at least in the House of Commons, not yet the House of Lords, is the permission for a medical practitioner to be able to give the ability to somebody to take their lives. So how should we think about this? Well, if you watched any of the debate in the House of Commons, you will have seen it was a very close vote, because there were a number of arguments, a number of considerations to take on board, and they were very, very, very compelling. Okay, and I picked up on probably what I feel like are 4 compelling arguments that were given in the House of Commons. So firstly, there was the emotional argument for this, and perhaps all of us would feel this argument the most keenly. When a person is suffering, when a person wants there to be an end to that suffering, our hearts break for them. We feel emotionally, we want to just relieve their suffering, don't we? And it's very hard to watch a person in suffering. So many people gave this argument, this emotional argument, like the fairest thing to do, the most merciful thing to do, the kindest thing to do would be to relieve a person's suffering and not allow that suffering to continue sort of indefinitely in their lives. And I think the merciful part of all of us feels that. Even Christians, all of us would sort of feel that we feel broken by death. It's not a pleasant thing. And so that found like that was a very compelling argument. within the House of Commons.
Mm.
But then it's not all just about emotions, because if it was only an emotional argument, it would have probably 100% of the House of Commons may have voted yes. So what made it more complicated? Well, then you begin to get into what we might call the ethical argument behind assisted dying. Every doctor still takes something called the Hippocratic Oath, which goes way back to Greek culture and Hippocrates, who really is the founder of modern medicine. And he wrote a code of conduct, if you will, for doctors that is still recited today, still used today. And one of the lines in the Hippocratic Oath is a promise to not do harm or administer poison. So that's in the Hippocratic Oath that our doctors take. And so there would definitely be an ethical argument there to say, am I breaking my oath by administering a poison or by essentially doing harm? And in doing that, are we making, if you like, changing the whole medical profession forever? The medical profession has only ever really existed to help people, never to harm. And so are we, in a sort of ethical sense, changing the purpose of medicine, changing the purpose of doctors? And that was a big part of the debate too. Of course, people that would also say, well, is it sort of ethical to grant a person's wish if they want it? Perhaps you're not breaking any code of ethics because there's a willingness to take that on, and so it's chosen by the individual, and therefore is of no ethical concern. And so that argument kind of went backwards and forwards a little bit. Then there's what we call the theological argument. So some of the people in the House of Commons, it was clear their faith was having an impact or an input into their decision. The Bible, for example, says, do not shed innocent life. God alone can take life and raise life up again. Our job really, from a biblical perspective, is to care for people, relieve their pain, create a society that sort of dignifies the dying process. That's Christian. But to take a person's life feels like it's in contradiction to everything the Bible says about the sanctity of life. So there's that aspect of that theological aspect of it. And also, who knows, we've got within a theological framework, we've got the wild card of prayer. You may take a person's life at 6 months, but who knows, at 4 months, God may have miraculously resurrected that person from that terminal illness. And we have that faith within Christianity, that the end is not the end until it's the end. God can always turn up. And so you've got these theological considerations going on. And then lastly, you've got what's called the social or civil kind of argument here, which is also known as the slippery slope. Okay, so the idea being here, if we allow this to happen, what's next? Okay, so we are giving here the right to, or the ability to, give assisted dying to terminally ill adults. So it doesn't take a lot of imagination to think that once that becomes the norm, what do we do when we see a terminally ill child? Well, they're not getting access to this on the current law. So if we start pushing that door, it's same arguments, all the emotional arguments. We don't want to see a child suffering. We must start to include that. Okay. So we include that, and what happens is over time, it picks up, and you start including more and more and more circumstances and situations and people, and it's called a slippery slope, because you end up in a place where you're now offering it to a much broader category of suffering people than you did it at the very beginning. So we're opening a door here, and we don't know where that is ultimately going to lead us as a society. And every time you do that, you sort of gradually devalue human life more and more and more. So there was a great fear of that happening. So emotional argument, ethical argument, theological argument, the slippery slope or civil arguments, these were all being taken into consideration in the debate of the Commons. And as you can see, that's why it was so difficult to untangle.
That's really helpful. A helpful way of breaking down what was a huge conversation, and like we said, very divisive. And thank you for breaking it down that way. That helps me understand some of the complexities. But how should we respond then as the church, because this looks like it's going through. As you say, it's not fully there yet, but it looks like that's the way our country's heading. What should the church be saying? How should we as Christians be responding to this?
Sure. Well, I think there's a couple of things we need to do. Firstly, I think we do need to resist every impulse of society to devalue human life. Okay, so whether that's at the beginning of life, and we haven't touched on it, but whether that's kind of the whole stuff around abortion, or whether it's end of life stuff, Christians have traditionally and biblically always argued for the sanctity of human life, and not giving people the power to take away human life, because ultimately that's not God's plan for us. And so I would say we would work to resist anything that devalues life. And then at the same time, we have to hold that hand in hand like a tension with compassion. Because there are hurting and broken families because of terminal illness. There are real challenges out there, and I think we need to treat people with great compassion. So, if you will, in the face of the law and the courts, we stand firm, we resist, and we uphold and protect the sanctity of life. And then with people on the ground, on the front line, we minister with compassion and grace and love and care, and without judgment. And we need to learn how to do both of those as Christians. And at times we'll perhaps have an opportunity to minister to somebody who's terminally ill. And while the doctors may be offering an injection, we can still continue to offer prayer, and we can continue to offer the presence of Jesus. And I think that should be our focus when we're ministering to people that are in that situation.
Very good. And what strikes me when we think of things like this, things that are happening in our wider culture, I always find it really helpful to read the book of Daniel. And here you've got a man of God in Babylon, in a culture and in a nation which sets itself up, which actively sets itself up against the things of God. And yet he manages to not only survive in that culture, but he thrives within it, and he brings change, and he brings the will of God to so many different areas. And one thing that he doesn't compromise on, just to highlight and affirm what you said, is prayer. So he just keeps praying, even when it was outlawed to do so. Like, what I can do, I may not be able to be present with these lawmakers, I may not be able to, I may not agree, I may not this, that, and the other. What I can absolutely do is pray. And I love how you've put that there. When it comes to interacting with people, we absolutely show the grace, compassion, the kindness of Jesus to them, whilst also being uncompromising on our views and upholding the sanctity of life wherever we can.
Absolutely.
So really good, Mike. Anything more you want to say on that?
No, I think that's everything. But those were some tricky questions.
Yeah, no, and I would say any more, you can pop some more in the chat if you want us to unpack some next time. But really, really well answered, mate. Not too tough.
It was tough, but hopefully, in my ramblings, something has helped somebody somewhere.
Do you know what? I often think that, Mike. With your ramblings, you always help me. So long may you ramble. Ramble on, Mike. Thank you.
Bless you.
Yeah. Bless you guys. Take care. Thanks for listening.